For most of my adult life, I operated under a conviction so deeply embedded that I would not have called it a belief. I would have called it just the way things are. The conviction was this: needing help was a form of failure. Not moral failure, more like a diagnostic one. Evidence of insufficient preparation, or insufficient resourcefulness. If you were struggling with something that someone else could have helped you with, the correct response was to figure out how to stop struggling on your own. Involving another person was the last resort, and by last resort I mean the thing you did after every other option had genuinely been exhausted, which, in practice, meant I never reached it. This was not pride in the conventional sense. It was something more fundamental, a genuine belief, at a level I had never examined directly, that asking for help changed how people saw you, and that how people saw you was a thing you needed to actively protect. There was a version of you that was acceptable, capable, contained, not a source of inconvenience, and that was the version you had to maintain. Especially with the people closest to you, because they were the ones whose perception mattered most. I was 29 when a man named Tomas, a colleague, someone I had worked beside for 4 years, someone I would have described at the time as a friend, pulled me aside after a meeting and said, with no particular drama, "You know, you've been struggling with the reporting structure since the reorganization. I went through something similar at my last job. Do you want to talk about how I handled it?" And I said, without thinking, without hesitation, "No, I'm fine. I've got it figured out." And I walked back to my desk and spent the next 6 weeks continuing to not have it figured out, producing work that I knew was below what I was capable of, in a state of low-grade misery that I had normalized so thoroughly I barely felt it anymore. The moment I want to examine is not the 6 weeks that followed, those were just more of the same. The moment is the 3 seconds between Tomas's offer and my refusal, because something happened in those 3 seconds that I did not understand for a long time afterward. It was not a calculation. It felt like one. Felt like I had rapidly assessed the situation and determined that I didn't need his help. But what actually occurred was a reflex, something faster and older than thought. A door appeared and I closed it before I had consciously registered it was there. The closing was automatic. It had been practiced so many times, over so many years, across so many situations where help was available and I had declined it, that it no longer required any deliberate decision. It had become the shape of how I moved through things. The reflex didn't originate in my professional life. It came from much earlier, from a family that was loving and functional by most measures, but that had a specific unspoken grammar around difficulty. In that grammar, difficulty was something you managed internally, or named briefly and then returned to resolving. Extended need was uncomfortable, not punished, not condemned, just visibly uncomfortable in the people around you, which as a child you learned to read with extraordinary precision. Sustained struggle, the kind that couldn't be resolved in one conversation, made the air in the room change in a way I did not know how to manage except by making the struggle invisible. So I made it invisible. Over and over, across years, until the invisibility became second nature, until I could not distinguish between genuinely not needing help and having become so practiced at performing not need that the need itself had gone underground. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that accumulates from this. It is not the exhaustion of hard work, which has a texture of effort and usually produces something. It is the exhaustion of maintenance, of holding a shape, consistently, in front of everyone you encounter, a shape that says, "I have this, I do not require anything, I am not a weight you will have to carry." It does not feel like labor. It feels like just existing. But it is labor, and it keeps costing something specific and real every day. After the exchange with Tomas, I went back to my desk and produced, over 6 weeks, work that was adequate. Not good, adequate. I knew the difference. And I knew that someone who had already solved the exact problem I was navigating was 20 feet away. I did not go back to him once. Reopening the offer would have meant acknowledging that the "I've got it figured out" version of me had not, in fact, had it figured out, a kind of grammatical error I did not know how to make. What I understand now is that I was protecting something that did not need protection. The offer was not a test. It was just an offer. But I had processed it as one, and by the time I understood that, the opportunity was gone. The moment I finally asked for help came about 8 months later, in a completely different situation, and it was so small and so undramatic that I almost missed what it was. I had been trying for 2 days to work through a problem with a data pipeline I was building, nothing high stakes, just a personal project, something I was doing in the evenings. I was stuck. I knew I was stuck. I knew that a friend of mine, Priya, had worked extensively with the same tools and would almost certainly know exactly what I was missing. And on the second evening, instead of opening another browser tab, I sent her a message. 6 words, "Can I ask you something technical?" She responded in 4 minutes. The answer to my problem took her approximately 1 paragraph to explain. I had been blocked for 2 days. The resolution, once I had stopped performing self-sufficiency at a person who was not in the room and did not require it, took 4 minutes and 1 paragraph. I want to be honest about how that felt. It did not feel like revelation. It felt like embarrassment, briefly, the familiar flush of having needed something, and then it felt like nothing. Like information received. Like the specific, quiet shift that occurs when a piece that has been stuck moves into its correct position. No drama. No restructuring of how I saw myself. Just, I didn't know something, I asked, now I know it. The smallness of that moment was its own kind of information. I had organized years of behavior around protecting myself from an experience that, when I finally allowed it, lasted 4 seconds and resolved into the ordinary texture of a Tuesday evening. The monster in the room, when I turned on the light, was not a monster. It was the ordinary human experience of not knowing something and asking someone who did. What I have been working to understand, in the years since that Tuesday evening, is why the protection felt so proportionate to the threat when the threat was so small. The answer is that the threat was never about the specific moment of asking. It was about identity, about a story I had been telling about the kind of person I was. The kind of person I was, in that story, did not need to ask. Did not arrive at a situation without the resources to navigate it. That identity was not chosen deliberately. It accumulated from a very early age, assembled out of readings of the emotional environment and decisions about what kind of presence was easiest to sustain within it. By the time I was an adult, I could not see it as a construction. It felt like a fact about myself. I am someone who handles things, as if that were a fixed property, like height, rather than a strategy that had outlasted its usefulness. What I needed, in that hallway with Tomas, was to say, yes, actually. Tell me what you know. Those words would have cost me nothing I could not afford to lose. The version of me that Tomas would have seen, the one who said yes, would not have been lesser. It would have been more accurate. The person actually in the hallway, rather than the careful projection I sent in his place. I know that now. I did not know it then. That gap is what this story is about, and everything that filled it. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real, do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable. It builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.